And since we announced this project and this evening, I've had two dominant questions. One of them is, why do something from 4 to 6 p.m. on a Friday? But all of you here are evidence that it actually isn't a bad slot, so thank you very much for starting your weekend with us. What could be a better way to start your weekend? And the other question is, why, Ed? You're this grizzled, longtime climate activist or advocate, and I was actually literally called grizzled 2 days ago, and I thought I've hit that stage of my career. Why are you looking and poking into nuclear energy? And by way of background, I was at the Pembina Institute for a number of years. I was executive director there, and at that time when I was there, I was actually quite critical of nuclear energy. So it's long lead time technology, it's capital intensive, the waste is this difficult problem, if not intractable, needs state or country level insurance. And it always kind of reminded me of the old adage that building nuclear in Canada is like high school students and sex. Why? We talk about it a lot more than we actually do it, and those who are doing it aren't doing it very well. But I came to have a different opinion, and partly it was being exposed to Ontario, and looking at the long track record of nuclear power in Ontario providing baseload power, and at any given time up to 50%. And also, I looked at it and said, well, kind of three things have changed, and this is in the last few years. One is that we're just going to need a lot more electricity. Demand is going up. As we're looking to electrify mobility and heat and our modern industrial economy, we're going to need a lot more electricity. And that means not just doubling demand, but that means we need to increase capacity by 2 or 3-fold. And we need to build it a lot faster. We need to build it sort of 3 to 6 times faster than what we've done in the previous decade. And we need that electricity. It's got to be low carbon as well. And I'm a big proponent of solar and wind, and coupled with batteries. I've spent a good chunk of my career working on it. We still don't have a modern industrialized economy that runs solely on that, so we're looking at something that's in the mix. And so far, combined cycle natural gas with carbon capture and storage has sort of virtually been a failure to launch. So we need that low carbon electricity to come from somewhere. So two, I kind of looked at nuclear as having this moment in Canada. And I'm old enough in my career that I've been through my third nuclear renaissance. I'm not sure, Todd, how many you've been through, but this is my third. So we've seen this story before, but I don't think we've ever seen the level of federal support that we have right now. And it seems that this federal government is very serious about nuclear energy, nuclear power. It's built it into its Canada Strong Fund. It's got the Major Projects Office that is looking at how to streamline approvals. It's got a forthcoming nuclear energy strategy, and it's got things like investment tax credits. It's Clean Electricity Investment Tax Credit, the Clean Tech Investment Tax Credit, which puts billions of potential tax credits on the table to build nuclear in Canada. So that's the second one. And then we've seen we've seen China, which is building nuclear at the rate of knots, kind of do innovative things around costs and around timelines, unlike what we've seen before. And then here, closer to home, we've seen the successful refurbishment of Darlington, and it came in on time, on budget. So we've been able to pull it off in a way and demonstrate with Darlington refurbishment that we can actually do large, complex nuclear projects and deliver them on time. So I decided that through my podcasting platform and through what I like to do, which is hosting sort of public events and group discussions, that I would try to add to the discussion on nuclear power in Canada. And that's what you're experiencing. That's what you're coming to be part of tonight. So we've got this series. It's a podcast series. We've got town halls, 4 of them around the country. This is the first one here, and I call it the breadbasket of nuclear power in Canada, where nuclear power is just part of the furniture. We're going to do another in New Brunswick, and then we're going to do one in each of the 2 provinces that I think are seriously considering nuclear power, and that's Saskatchewan and Alberta. So you're here for the first town hall, and we really want you to be part of it, and we're going to do it in a little bit of a different way. It's not just your usual talking heads panel, and I will introduce these 2 wonderful talking heads in a second who will join me. But we're also going to take from the series that we've done a series of interviews with a bunch of interesting experts on nuclear power here in Canada and abroad, and we're going to play some of them their clips, and we're going to get our panelists, our esteemed panelists, to react to them. So that's the format. We're going to try to do that in an hour or less. Is that what everyone signed up for? If you thought it was going to be different, you can still keep your drink tickets and head to the exit. If you have to leave early, that's fine. But that's what we're doing tonight. So we're going to work off of 3 themes. And these are themes that we drew from our interviews. So the first one is the cost paradox, and that's learning curves. We'll talk about unlearning curves and the price of firm power. The second one is democracy's dilemma, and that is the system working as designed, but is that actually compatible with building nuclear at a scale and in a timeline that we need? And the third is the standardization paradox. I call it the can-do we forgot, because other countries are showing the way to move forward is standardizing reactor models. And now I will get to our highly esteemed panelists. So first we have the Honorable Todd Smith. I'm sure you recognize him. He was in politics, public life for 10 years. He held a number of ministerial portfolios, including, critically for tonight, he was Minister of Energy from 2021 to 2024. And now he is serving as Vice President of Marketing and Business Development at Can-Do Energy. And there he leads the global promotion deployment of Canadian-owned, Canadian tech, Can-Do. So let's hear it for Todd Smith. Thank you. And we also have Brendan Frank. So Brendan is Vice President of Policy at Clean Prosperity, which is a terrific think tank. Check them out. They produce incredible work. He spent over a decade shaping energy policy. He started his career in the energy sector in Alberta, where I live, and he's been a regular commentator on nuclear power and has published in the Globe and Mail and the Toronto Star and other fine publications. So welcome, Brendan. And as I say, it's not just the two of them. We're going to bring in voices from afar through the magic of technology. So you're going to hear some of the people that we talked to as part of this series. Okay, I'm going to move from this podium. I'm going to sit down with these panelists, and we'll take it away. Okay, gentlemen, let's unpack the first theme we talked about, and that's the cost paradox, learning curves, and the price of firm power. So the problem with nuclear to date has been it hasn't gone through a learning curve, it's gone through an unlearning curve. And the unlearning curve is each successive project gets more expensive, not less expensive, and it's almost like nuclear looked at Moore's law and said, I'm going to do the opposite of that. So fine with everyone we talk to, like that's the biggest limitation to trying to build new power is that cost, and will it actually come down, and can we manage it? So we had a show with Energy versus Climate with Jason Donev, the University of Calgary, and one of my co-hosts, David Keith, who some of you might know, had this provocative thing to say. Take it away, clip number 1.
The costs are, frankly, a joke. A fair way to summarize it is, in the Western world at least, we just do not know how to build reactors at a cost that's not a joke. People were building reactors at a reasonable price, and kind of $2,500 a kilowatt in current terms back in the day, but we've completely forgotten how to do that. So the actual costs of the completions in the Western world are, well over $10,000, up towards $20,000 a kW, which is just a joke. And nobody can really say clearly what fix would be needed to change that.
So I want to go first to Todd, as former energy minister of Ontario. So you heard David's critique right now, his provocation. What gives you the confidence that, and as minister, what gave you the confidence that Ontario could break that unlearning curve problem?
You touched on it right off the top in your opening remarks, Ed, when you talked about the Darlington refurbishment project. And I understand that refurbishing a nuclear reactor isn't exactly the same as building a greenfield reactor, a brand new reactor, but it's very much the same. You're pulling essentially everything out of the reactor housing and then rebuilding the reactor from the inside. So it's a massive, massive project. In the case of Darlington, it was a $13 billion project. You're going to get another 35 years out of the Darlington reactors at about the cost 20% the cost of building brand new reactors. So it makes a lot of sense from a dollars and cents perspective. there's a report or a paper that was written by Oxford University, and it's called The Unicorn of a Nuclear Project. And it talks about Darlington, and it interviews the folks that were working on the Darlington project for OPG, and that includes a lot of my colleagues now at CANDU Nuclear who were involved in planning for that project and then finishing the project, which was a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar project, as I mentioned. I think over the course of that project, the fleet approach, which you also mentioned off the top, is a big part of it. You're doing the same thing over and over and over, which gives you that repeatability, which gives you the recent history of improving on those projects each and every time. So each time we did a unit, it came in ahead of the previous unit and under the budget that had been set for those nuclear refurbishment projects. So that was a big part of what gave me the comfort to move forward. There also is the CANDU history internationally, which is something that I talk about a lot now in my current role with CANDU, selling internationally in different places where they have to get rid of coal-fired power plants in places like the ASEAN region, for instance. 53% of the world's global emissions are coming from those countries down in Southeast Asia. And the projects that we built with CANDU back in the 90s and early 2000s all came in on time and on budget, whether it was in China or Korea or other parts of that international build-out. Those projects also came in on time. Now, that was over 20 years ago, so we haven't built a new plant since 2007 in Romania. But we have the history of and repeatability of the major component replacements at Bruce Power, but also the refurbishment at OPG and then in Balse in Argentina, which has been refurbished as well, which were learning experiences. And I think that's what gives us the confidence going forward that in this new nuclear renaissance, CANDU anyway, can be there to ensure that we complete these projects on time and on budget.
Great, and I do, our third theme, I want to get to that repeatability aspect because I think it's critical and we're seeing other countries really honing in on that. But Brendan, so Clean Prosperity commissioned some polling results to look at the attitudes of Canadians relative to nuclear. And I'd love for you to hit upon those poll results, but the implications as well, their tolerance, which we'll test here, their tolerance for cost overruns on nuclear.
For sure. So we commissioned some polling from Leger last year looking at Canadian attitudes towards nuclear. We asked a binary question: which of the two is closer to your view? Is nuclear a potential solution to Canada's climate and energy challenges? Or is nuclear a false solution to Canada's climate and energy challenges? Or I don't know. About half, a little over half of Canadians said that nuclear can be a solution to Canada's energy and climate challenges. About 1 in 5 or 20% said it's a false solution. 30% don't know. In other words, about 80% of Canadians are at least open to nuclear power. That support collapses the moment you introduce cost as a trade-off. When we asked people if they were willing to tolerate 10% increases in their electricity prices, if it meant building nuclear, only 5% of Canadians said yes. And I think that makes really stark how not only the nuclear build-out that we are contemplating, but also just electrification in general needs to be affordable to maintain public support.
And especially in this political climate right now, and I've just spent a lot of time in Ottawa last week, and yeah, affordability is top of mind for any retail politician out there, like what you would do, knocking on doors.
Yeah, for sure. And quite honestly, elections are won and lost on energy policy and electricity rates. Often, I've been in a few of those elections, fortunately for me on the winning side of those elections, but obviously it's top of mind. When it's top of mind, people are very concerned about it because it's the electricity bill that comes in the mail, or I guess via email now, for a lot of people every month that they see and can understand what the cost inputs are. I was in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago at the Natural Resources Committee meeting, talking about the energy policy that's coming out of Ottawa these days, and specifically there, obviously, in my role as as a business development VP for Candu, but the conversation with MPs turned a lot to the cost of electricity compared to renewables, and I believe it was a Bloc Québécois member who was actually asking the question, well, why would we build nuclear plants if we can build renewable for so much cheaper? And that's a very fair question, and it gets asked all the time. I think we need to do both, actually. We need to build cheap energy, but we also need to build valuable capacity. And the capacity is so important to running an efficient system. It's one of the things that I learned during my time at the Ministry of Energy here in Ontario and working with the folks at the Independent Electricity System Operator. You have to have both, and you can't compare both, right? Because they're very, very different. They're apples and they're oranges. Energy is one thing, but capacity is an entirely different thing and has its own value that's very important to running an efficient grid. So, often when we talk about renewables, they're obviously intermittent. The capacity factor can be anywhere from 15 to 35%, where with nuclear plants, you're getting anywhere from 90 to 94% capacity, and it's that firm baseload that's so important, especially globally, and we've done it here in Ontario already, where we've phased out coal. But there are so many places around the world that are looking to phase out their coal-fired plants, and you can't do it with wind and solar. You have to have baseload power replace the baseload power. So it's a very fair question and conversation point, but when you're comparing renewables, you kind of have to repair renewables and storage and transmission and grid stability with nuclear that provides all of those things.
And I know here in the audience, I see a bunch of people are probably biting lips. I do want you to know we will get to Q&A, so you will be able to have, get up and challenge your speakers. We encourage that. Challenge me, say what you think. And I will say, it's interesting you mentioned Quebec, because Quebec is one place that decommissioned nuclear, that had a unit, took it out of service, and particularly because they're spooked by the possible costs of refurbishment. And so we've got the Darlington example. We have Pickering coming up. And that could be, where's Jan Gorski of the Pembina Institute? Yeah, there's Jan. Jan, can you stand up? Use that analogy you told me yesterday of comparing Darlington to Pickering refurbishment.
Well, this is a story someone else told me. They compared Pickering to buying a 100-year-old house. You're trying to replace the toilet, and then you try to undo a bolt. It's totally rusty, and the whole head comes off, and you've got to call in a machinist. That's kind of what I was told. This is not mine now.
I'm actually doing that right now, renovating a house that's 100 years old, so I can very much relate to that analogy. But I think, when you look at the amount of power that's going to come from Pickering, and obviously there's the experience from Darlington that's going to transfer into Pickering, the idea is that we'll be able to replace that baseload power that's going to come offline it's coming offline now to be replaced for the long term, another 30 to 35 years.
Yeah. Brendan, I want to turn to you because there's a unit in the U.S., Vogtle, if I've got the pronunciation right. I think it's got a strange T in there, but a silent T, that actually drove electricity up by 10% or more, and that cratered public opinion, public support.
Sure did. So I imagine a lot of people in this room are familiar with the Vogtle case, but I'll briefly go over it. So just by way of context, the U.S. has about 94 active reactors online right now, and no 5 are alike. The fleet-based approach that Canada took, the U.S. went the opposite way, and their costs spiraled as a result. That continued with Vogtle. The utility in Georgia, Georgia Power, advanced this project in 2007, 2008. It ended up taking almost 20 years to bring those 2 reactors online, and I would say the project is, let's say, a cautionary tale on governance, on financing, and on accountability. There were many points of failure at Vogtle. The initial reactor cost, or project cost, was about $14 billion, ended up at about 35 US, so about 50 billion Canadian, and that's, as David noted in his comments, that gets you into about the $25 per watt category, which is just exorbitant and not viable in the long run. Like the real failure with Vogtle was that Georgia Power, the utility, had a cost recovery model called construction work in progress, where basically they were able to bill the ratepayers as they went, and as the project started to bump into labor issues, supply issues, et cetera, they were able to just bill ratepayers as they went. And it ended up putting tremendous stress on Westinghouse, the technology owner, and on all the vendors who had no exposure to those cost overruns and therefore had no incentive to deliver on time and on budget. So I think there's a great deal we can learn from Vogtle. And I think there's, good reasons to avoid that model here in Canada.
Great. Well, I want to talk about the Darlington SMR project. That's the BWRX 300, the world's first SMR, and all eyes are on it. But I don't want to talk about it. I want Sarah to talk about whether it's going to break the unlearning curve problem or not.
There's a lot of talk, I think, about SMRs or this new solution. It's going to be so great because we can build lots of them and we can get the same kind of learning curve we've seen for solar. And Jason, you already, answered this by saying that we need to build out about 3 times the amount of nuclear that we have today in order to, decarbonize. The whole magic of the learning curve is like orders of magnitude, not factors of 3. And so the idea that we're going to see, any amount of real cost reduction from scale up of nuclear in, again, let's talk about, say, the US and Canada, or even throw Europe in there. I think that is just completely false.
So let's talk about that and to achieve, economies of scale and actually break that unlearning curve. I would say that the odds of, I'm guessing, of the Darlington SMR project going over budget are the same odds of the Maple Leafs not winning the Stanley Cup at the beginning of any season.
Come on.
Case in point this season. Sorry, that was unnecessary and gratuitous. I'm not from Toronto, in case you're wondering. But, Ontario's making a very calculated risk that the BWRX reactor is sort of the reactor of the future, and if they can nail this and deliver it on time, on cost, then the order book's going to fill up. The problem is it's often not the first one, it's the second one where you nail the on time, on cost part. And I will say the timeline that they proposed, that OPG, is blindingly fast. It's like 4.5 years. And Matt McLaren had a great piece in the Globe and Mail about it yesterday. Todd, what do you think about it?
I didn't see the article, but clearly OPG's made its bet on the BWRX 300 from GV Hitachi, and this is the first small modular reactor in construction in the Western world. There are other SMRs that are currently online in China and Russia. But this is the first one in the G7, and certainly it is a first of a kind, even though when it was selected by OPG as the technology of choice, it was supposed to be the closest to something that has been around for a long time, which is a boiling water reactor, which has been in existence. This is a scaled down version, a 300 megawatt reactor. Like any first of a kind project, there are some growth challenges and construction challenges that are going on. The idea is that if you build 4 of these, unlike what our commentator said, you will have the repeatability, you will have the lessons learned, and I think again we've evidenced that in the small module, or in the refurbishments that we've done at Darlington, and keeping in mind that the same crews that are working on the SMR project in many cases are the same crews that are working on the SMR project right next door at Darlington. So, the proof will be in the pudding, obviously. There have been a few challenges with the project. Originally, it was supposed to be online in 2029. I believe now that's been pushed to 2030. But OPG, Atkins Realis, a lot of my colleagues are working on that project along with the folks from GV Hitachi as well to make sure that's a success. A lot of places around the world, and I'm constantly circling the globe in my new role selling CANDO, but they're asking us about the BWRX because they know it's being built in Canada. It's American technology, but it's being built in Canada, and they're looking for updates on this project. So, Ontario wanted to be sort of in the spotlight when it comes to nuclear. I believe what it's done is it's opened the conversation not just for small modular reactors, but it's also reopened the conversation for new CANDOs and new large conventional nuclear around the world too, just because of the scale that's going to be necessary when it comes to decarbonize many of the places that I've been visiting over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and one of the things that really caught my attention early on is going back to Hockey Note, watching Hockey Night in Canada and seeing the ads Protect Ontario. and Rob Ford and.
There's more than one of them. There's quite a few of those.
There's quite a few of them, but the one that actually champions nuclear power, we're building nuclear power, and then we can take that know-how and export it to the rest of the world. And of course, where I come from in oil and gas land, that's what we think about oil and gas development. What are your thoughts, Brendan?
So I think Sarah's broadly correct that we wouldn't expect SMRs or reactors of any kind to descend the learning curve the way that wind or solar or batteries have. Wind, solar, and batteries are following Wright's law, which means every doubling of global capacity, you tend to see 20 to 22% cost reductions. There are just, because of their scale, fewer doubling times with reactors. We're not going to see 90%, 95% cost declines, but we may see 30% cost declines. We may see 50% cost declines. The Vogtle project, even though it was a bit of a disaster, the second reactor was 30% cheaper than the first. OPG is estimating that the third of kind SMR at Darlington will cost something like 60% of the first of kind. And if we can achieve that learning curve, if the BWRX is 3 or 4 billion rather than 8 billion once we get to fourth or fifth of a kind, then I think we actually have something. That is a viable model to move forward with.
Cool. Let's try our first audience poll question. Carlos, this might be a loaded question. But, sir, you don't have clickers. You can't click at home or in your seats. So let's just do a quick show of hands. Will Ontario build the first BWRX 300 on time and on budget? Those who think yes. Great. Can you show up and show everyone your shirt, please? Because it is wonderful.
It's a little cynical, but I don't mean it.
Yeah.
You can't trust an atom, they make up everything.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful.
I think if you were going to make a T-shirt out, you'd put "Never trust an atom because they're always splitting on you." That would work as well, right?
Yeah, the jokes are coming thick and fast. All right, so let's hear the no. Let's see, hands on the no. Okay, and then the depends. Okay, a few people hedging. And I'd say it doesn't matter. Like, maybe going back to your poll results, if it doesn't come in on time, on budget, what are the implications for Ontario ratepayers? Like, will that then destroy license to build out the 3 reactors, or is that a fait accompli? Is it going to happen regardless?
I mean, it depends how over budget and how delayed, right? If it's 2030 run rather than 2030, then I don't think we really have a problem. If it's 2033, 2034, 2035, then I think there's a reasonable discussion to be had about whether or not to continue with the project. All eyes are on Ontario right now. There are other jurisdictions that are looking at this model. The Tennessee Valley Authority, Estonia, Poland. There could be dozens of these things online by 2050. And there is a first mover advantage here. Ontario is basically making a bet that eating the first of kind costs will pay off in the long run through those export opportunities and through the scaling of the reactors. So it is a bet, but it's a reasonably hedged bet, I would say.
Cool. Let's move on to the next theme. And this is democracy's dilemma, the system working as designed. And we're going to do a bit of a compare and contrast. Now, granted, it's through 2 different political systems. So China right now is delivering new reactors through a fleet approach on the order of 6 to 8 years. When I look back, and Matt McLaren's article was great, and kind of looked at the average in Canada, and though we haven't built something new for a while, but the average is upwards of more 8 and 9 years. Like, kind of not that far apart. But let's play a couple clips and hear what, who do we have? We have Tim Boston.
The CNSC.
Sorry. We have Tim Boston, who is a longtime Alberta-based electricity executive. And he's just finished a stint being on the panel, the consultation panel, the task force that Daniel Smith appointed to look at the prospects of nuclear in Alberta. And then we also have Joseph Donovan, this U of C prof and nuclear expert that I mentioned. We'll hear him back to back.
The CNSC, Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's process is minimum 6 years. I think if you're getting it done in 6, you've won the lottery somehow. And so there are many steps in that process that cover all those things, including significant consultation, significant sharing of data with communities, funding for capacity to allow communities, Indigenous nations to interact and make sure they can actually do their own research and understand the impacts of those. But that's, again, another step down the road when we actually get to a real project proposal.
The actual construction time doesn't really differ. China might be able to do like 20, 30% faster. What's different is duty to consult. What's different is public consultation, the regulatory framework, the impact assessment, that's where you're throwing 5 to 10 years on a Canadian project that China is able to do far more quickly. So going from we want to build a nuclear reactor to we have a nuclear reactor, between China and Canada, I would say it's about a factor of 2, but it's not construction that's doing it.
As I watched that, by the way, I wish the box that contained my smiling face wasn't lurking like directly over top of me. That is super weird. So I will say, and it's kind of an eventful day because the Carney government just announced that it's putting on hold changes to the environmental assessment process that would have fast-tracked certain environmental assessments. I'm not quite sure if it included, I think it would have included nuclear. I mean, they referred it to the major projects office, so that's clearly try to streamline and fasten it and speed it up. I guess, is the only way to build nuclear fast enough in Canada to meet our increasing demand for electricity and what we need to do to decarbonize, is the only way to do it, does that require bypassing some of the time-intensive consultation that we built into it? Like, what do you think?
I'm on the record many times as saying we just have to reduce the duplication. I think the process that's in place with CNSC is fine, and actually it's better than fine. They've set the international standard on how to do this properly at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, which is our nuclear regulator here in Canada. And when I am abroad talking to different countries, they're working in many cases with the CNSC and standing up their regulator because they want their regulator to operate similar to the way Canada's does, given the 60-year history or 70-year history of the CNSC. It's part of the reason why when we embarked on the nuclear projects, when I was the minister, we were very, very fortunate that we had already licensed sites that were available to us. There was still some work that needed to be done, particularly at the Bruce C site, but the OPG site where the SMRs are being built now, was already licensed and ready for new build, and that's why they've been able to get things going as quickly as they have as well. Do we need to speed things up? I think, obviously everything that was mentioned in there from the consultation and so on, environmental studies is super important. I mean, this is nuclear we're talking about, and nuclear safety, we talk about it every single day at our offices. It's how we start every single meeting is with a value moment on addressing nuclear safety. So we're very fortunate that this industry, given all the megawatts that are produced globally, is very, very safe, and it's because of that safety culture that exists with nuclear now. But if we're going to reduce the emissions that we want to reduce, we're going to have to build faster, and we're going to have to build at scale. Just a point on CANDU's build in China, because it was referenced in the comment. The fastest CANDU plant ever built was in China at the Qinshan site, 4 years and 11 months, from shovels in the ground to putting electricity on the grid. So that was the last Qinshan unit. We estimate now going forward that we can build CANDUs in 5 to 6 years. But yes, it's that upfront environmental assessment, the licenses that are necessary from the CNSC that add a longer period of time onto that. I missed the news today. Unfortunately, I was driving in from Eastern Ontario listening to a podcast from earlier this week. So it wasn't yours, Ed, but it was another entertaining podcast. But that's news, and we'll have to look into what that actually means for nuclear builds going forward, unless Brendan knows.
Yeah, I don't think going as fast as possible here is desirable. I think what we really want is to do it right rather than to do it fast. We would support reducing duplication at the federal level, returning all of the responsibilities that were previously assigned to the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada back to the CNSC, I think is an advisable step. The challenge there, of course, is that the CNSC is under-resourced. Their best people are getting poached by the nuclear industry now that the nuclear industry is serious about building again. So making sure that the CNSC is properly resourced and has the capacity to issue licenses and permits, I think is quite critical at this juncture.
Great. Let's go to our next poll question, Carlos. Which matters more for Canadian nuclear? Speed, legitimacy, or we can't choose? So again, it's a very non-technical way of seeing what the audience thinks. So which matters more? Speed, put your hands up. Great. Legitimacy? Great, you can't choose. So I think in this case, it wasn't as unequivocal as the last time. I think people care a bit more about legitimacy. Anyone on the speed side want to get up and say why? We have a mic. Eli, you're smiling at me. And Eli is an old friend and colleague, and he's within reaching distance of the mic. So Eli, you want to talk about speed?
I just think from the standpoint of nuclear is always essentially like linked to the state in its development. And so if Canada is going to have an industry around nuclear, we need to be fast or we will get beat by others.
Fair. Anyone from the legitimacy side? Oh, yeah, thank you. Carlos was promising me to give Eli a round of applause. Round of applause for Eli, everyone. He was the first person apart from the guy with the funky shirt to get up and say something, so, yeah. Oh, no, Jan did as well, yeah. So that applause extends to the two of you as well. Anyone from legitimacy? Anyone want to comment on why you think legitimacy is more important? Yes.
In my opinion, I think legitimacy is important for reputation-wise. In order to continue building more nuclear power plants and SMRs, I think public's perception is very important. And if we have a major failure in the first project, then it's not going to look good for the remainder of the future projects.
Yep, good point. I will say, and going back to Todd, something you said, because you hit upon safety, you'll notice it's conspicuously absent from our themes. And to date in our interviews, we've run about 12 or so. You know, it really, people haven't raised, our interviewees haven't raised safety as being sort of like primacy of concern. I say this, I'm married to a Japanese woman. We experienced Fukushima very deeply, very personally. Some of you might have histories around 3 Mile Island, or some of you might be Ukrainian in background and have connections to Chernobyl. But it's interesting, it doesn't seem, when people talk about nuclear right now, it doesn't seem to be top of mind.
Not in this country as much, but you're right. In other places, it is very sensitive as a topic, and that's where you really have to, as a nuclear industry, go in and talk about the success. And I don't mean this to be a can-do commercial, but 60 years of safe and reliable electricity production. I think the health issues that come, as we all know, from carbon in the environment are enormous and are having huge impacts on people's health globally. So there is a very positive health story to tell for nuclear, and that's why people have changed their opinion over the last 5-10 years. Many of those who were against nuclear are now seeing that this is the only way we're going to be able to clean our air in difficult to replace fossil fuel places.
Mm-hmm. You still have, just as a stat, tens of millions of people dying globally from airborne pollutants like SOx and NOx and mercury that comes from coal-fired electricity. And if you're worried about heat and you want to get more worried, read Jeff Goodell's The Heat Will Kill You First, about, unfortunately, the likelihood of heat deaths increasing from extreme heat. I want to move on to our last theme, and then I really want to open it up to the audience here for questions. So the last is we talked about standardization, and we've kind of hit upon it, and I think, Todd, you've made your view clear about sort of the advantages of a fleet approach or standardization. And if you wanted to design a country that would never standardize anything, you might accidentally invent Canada. And given the nature of our confederation, in that we put these decisions in the hands fundamentally of the provinces, the regulators in the hands of the feds. But to date, they've mostly taken one approach, and at the risk of stumping for your company, they've taken the can-do approach. Let's hear what Xu Yichong, who is a professor at Griffith University in Australia, but she taught at the University of Alberta. Let's hear what she has to say.
What can we learn from our past? Not what we can learn from China. If you look at the current 16 nuclear power plants in operation in Canada are all can-do reactors. That's how you standardize it. That's how you reduce the construction time and reduce the cost. No, Alberta wants to have AP1000 built. New Brunswick want to have a small modular reactor. Then Ontario got the two different models. No, you don't do that.
Yeah, so XU, and she prefers that people pronounce her name XU, spelling it out, that she's been clearly emphatic about what she thinks the right approach is. Brendan, what's your reaction?
So I think there's a case for doing a fleet-based approach with both large and small reactors in Canada. It may end up that we need two. The reason for that is because other provinces like Saskatchewan and New Brunswick that are considering building other reactors, their grids are just too small to accommodate a large reactor. They don't have the infrastructure for it. It would require significant transmission build-out, and if that reactor goes offline, all of a sudden you're exposed to significant shortages. Repeat builds is the name of the game here. It's not unique to the nuclear sector that we're going over budget and over time. That is a problem for mega projects in general. Nuclear can overcome that. The only way to overcome that is by doing it again and again and again.
Yeah, I would say even XU is a little bit off on the Canada analogy because not every CANDU in Canada is actually the same standard design either. So I think we've learned from that in Canada, and the idea is to bring forward a standard CANDU design that's going to be built anytime, and I work for a company that has 42,000 engineers in it, anytime you bring in engineers, sorry to any engineers that are here, they want to fiddle with stuff and make it better. No matter how good it is, they want to make it better, but you can't do that in this business. If you have a reactor that works, the best thing you can do is just repeat that same standard design over and over again. Obviously, you're going to have to do site-specific work depending on where the reactor is built, but as far as the main standard plant, build it over and over and over again. And that's what Canada did internationally back in the late 90s and early 2000s.
You know what engineers also do? I'll just say quickly. They, in addition to fiddling things, they write love letters to their spouses and boyfriends and girlfriends in Excel. They do everything in Excel. It's drive me nuts. Brendan.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important point. The nuclear sector, to its detriment in recent decades, has prioritized innovation over standardization. Innovating with the same design is fine. Going for Gen 4 reactors when Gen 3 Plus is a much safer, better understood technology, I think is ill-advised. And I think there's a reason that the BWRX is the reactor being built at Darlington by Hitachi, Aecon, Atkins, et cetera, and not by Moltex or Terrestrial or X Energy or any of these other startups that are promising, I think, big things, but don't have a reasonable timeline to deliver them.
I want to get to our last clip, once again from XU, and talking about a novel kind of carrot and stick approach that the Chinese government took standardization.
At that point, State Council, this is the equivalent to the cabinet, asked the two sides to merge into one Generation 3 model of reactor. They refused to do so. At the last minute, the State Council said, if you do not work together to develop this Generation 3 model, we're not going to approve any new project. So first they gave the carrot, then later they gave the stick.
So a bit of a shot, and to use another analogy, they sort of forced a shotgun marriage approach, and that's kind of underlied the standardization approach China's taken. Does anyone, and I might be answering my own questions, does anyone have the authority or the legitimacy to kind of force Canadian provinces to also take a fleet approach? Or does that get you into this quagmire of federal, provincial politics? And I'm asking the former politician. Oh, no, he doesn't want to take it.
Yeah, no, Brendan looked like he was anxious to answer that one. I don't think so. I mean, I think in the conversations that I've had, with the federal government over the last year or so, there's definitely a desire to build CANDUs at the federal level, but it's also not their jurisdiction. Because of the hodgepodge of provinces that we do have here, and they have the decision-making power on technology, I think all we can do is try and encourage decision makers in those provinces to do what makes sense for Canada. And I don't think I need to finish the sentence as to which technology is best for Canada, because I think we hopefully already know that.
Yeah, I think carrots rather than sticks at the federal level is probably the way to go. One idea that we have recommended is the idea of enhancing the federal investment tax credits for provinces that pick reactors that are consistent with a fleet-based approach. So it's, these ITs are worth potentially billions of dollars. That could be pretty enticing for a province that is on the fence. I will also say we do support a competitive process for the large reactor technology choice. There are a lot of reasons to like CANDU, homegrown technology, domestic supply chain, we've built them before, but you don't just want to hand that over without a competition.
Okay, we'll just get two more quick comments from each, and then we're going to open it up for the rest of the time to questions from the audience. So if you have questions, raise your hand, and we've got a couple mics and a couple people who are willing to rove around with the mics. And my last question is, all right, you look at it, if nuclear is to play an important and growing role in Canada's electricity mix, what would you change? If your energy or electricity or nuclear czar, what would one change be that you would make?
Well, it would be to build CANDU nuclear plants and make it pretty clear that that's the choice. I understand what Brendan's saying about making sure there's a competitive dialogue and process that's in place, but at the same time, especially given the environment that we live in today and the sort of unstable geopolitical world that we live in, energy security is such an important topic. We're a bit shielded from it here in North America, but I'll tell you, globally, there are so many different countries that love the CANDU story, and this is sort of the differentiator between CANDU and the 5 other large-scale conventional nuclear technologies that are out there, is that we use natural uranium as the fuel, meaning you don't have to rely on another country, one of the 5 other countries, to enrich your fuel for you. You have that type of security where you can buy the uranium on the open market, you can build your fuel in the country, you don't have to be dependent on one of those countries for your uranium. And I mean, even the United States now, which does have some enrichment capabilities, is still buying 25 or 30% of its uranium, enriched uranium every year from Russia. And, it's not a good situation to be in, and that's much more sensitive when you're talking to countries like Poland, where I'm doing business right now, that are very, very uneasy about their neighbors to the east because of what's happening in Ukraine and what has continuously been happening in Poland with the Russians being as provocative as they are. So, obviously the answer is easy for me, but I'm interested to hear what Brendan has to say.
So I would take it up a level, and I would say we need to electrify everything. The case for building nuclear at scale, doubling, tripling our own capacity, along with the world, by 2050, doesn't really make sense unless it's being done in the context of an ambitious package of electrification and climate policies. We can build wind, solar, batteries, some gas, very, very quickly. Nuclear is not competing with those. We need the confidence, investors need the confidence that there is going to be 2 to 3% load growth for the next 20 years, and policymakers need to send that signal.
Great. Okay. Let's turn to the audience. It's open mic time. Do you have any questions for our panelists? Okay, I see a furtive hand almost going up. Okay.
Hi. I'm wondering how useful the concept of baseload is for the modern electric grid. Energy conservation measures have largely targeted the nighttime ghost loads. Solar panels fill up the daytime peaks, and storage and demand response is better able to throttle for the evening gaps in between. So how much room is there left for a technology that has trouble throttling up and down?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the there is no jurisdiction that I'm aware of that has more than 50% renewables on the grid as a percent of total capacity. Germany is if not at the top of the list, near the top of the list. We should see how far we can get with those technologies, wind, solar, batteries, demand response. It may end up being the case that we can only get 60% of the way. It may end up being the case that we can only get 70% of the way. I view nuclear as a hedge once we start to bump into some of those constraints, curtailment, congestion, load shedding, inertia issues. Clean firm power is incredibly important. It's not just the power itself, it's the attributes that come with it.
Yeah, and I would say, to answer your question, after 20 years of relatively flat demand in Ontario, and I can speak to the Ontario case because I worked in it for a long time. Demand was flat for 20 years in Ontario, largely because of conservation programs that were very effective. There was a lot of growth that was happening across the province, particularly here in Toronto. At the same time, though, there was a lot of industry that was leaving the province in the manufacturing sector, and then the conservation programs heaped on top of that meant that for a long time there wasn't load growth. But a couple of years ago, we started to see the demand grow. I believe last year, our peak day was about 23,000 megawatts in late June during a really warm spell. But as things continue to electrify, and we believe they are going to continue to electrify, and as we continue to see heat pumps coming online and electric arc furnaces being installed at steel making facilities like at Algoma and Sault Ste. Marie and potentially in Hamilton, those are going to have a tremendous impact on the amount of power that we're going to require here in the province. And you're not going to be able to do it with renewables only. You're going to have to do it with renewables and nuclear and storage and potentially some more biomass in some places, maybe not. But I think if you look at the numbers that the ISO is projecting, when I was the minister, they were talking about the doubling of the grid by 2050. So that's going to require an all-of-the-above approach. So it's going to require the renewables. We're limited as to how much more hydroelectric power we can put on the grid. We're lucky that we have about 20-25% of our power every day comes from our hydroelectric fleet. But not so much is coming from renewables right now, other renewables. We can add more renewables along with the storage facilities, whether they be battery or pumped, and then we're going to need more nuclear. There's no question about that.
And just to put some other numbers to it, so I'm from Alberta, and if you look at the increase in demand right now, like at peak days, same thing, like your Ontario equivalent, it's about half of that, it's about 12 gigawatts of output. In the regulatory queue for data centers is about another 12 gigawatts of demand.
Yeah, that's the other, I didn't mention artificial intelligence or data centers, which are going to require a lot more. And then really we didn't start talking about data centers until about, 2 or 3 years ago, when that conversation really started to heat up, so to speak. So we know how voracious the electricity appetite is for these data centers. We'll see as the technology evolves if they still require as much electricity 10, 20 years from now. But right now they demand a heck of a lot of electricity.
Well, SpaceX is just going to put data centers in space for us. Right. Yep. Okay. Let's see.
Another one here.
Okay.
I'll preface by saying I don't work in energy industry, so and I'm glad you mentioned AI for the first time, I think, in this 1 hour, 1.5 hour. But I'm wondering how, with the revolution of AI we have, could that cut down just on bringing a nuclear power plant to, from shovels down to the grid? I know you said construction maybe not be the biggest, factor. It's the other things, but how could we shorten that period is there a possibility? Just wondering.
So I don't actually think that nuclear and data centers are a particularly good fit. They're not working on the same timelines. You might have a couple of hyperscalers in the FANG or the Magnificent Seven who decide to do that, but in the short run, I think most of that is going to be met with gas and potentially some renewables. There was a project in Minnesota recently, Bring Your Own Power, where they're actually using renewables and batteries to power data centers. There are a lot of creative options here. I just don't really think the timelines are going to match up in a way that where AI and data centers are going to be driving demand for nuclear projects.
That's interesting. We're hearing obviously a different story when we're talking. They want the power yesterday, obviously, and we can't deliver it that fast. But we're working. Atkins Realis is with NVIDIA, which is I think the biggest company in the world right now, on developing 10 AI factories, which would be gigawatt factories that would be powered by 2 enhanced CANDU 6 units on each site. They would be a hybrid type of a system where the gigawatt that's necessary at the AI factory would be devoted to that plant, but the excess would be able to be available to the grid in whatever jurisdictions that Mr. Wong and his team at NVIDIA are looking to build these plants. I believe they're looking at 7 in the United States and then 3 elsewhere internationally. But there's a real opportunity for Atkins Realis and CANDU potentially when it comes to building these AI factories. But yeah, the time is of the essence, and we need to be able to build these fast and build them at scale.
Yeah, NVIDIA and Amazon and that sort of class of company might have the capital and the patience, but I don't think Kevin O'Leary is going to be waiting around for nuclear power.
And I just want to be clear that Atkins Realis is neither sponsoring tonight nor this project. Yeah, as much as I like the CANDU. Okay, we have time for a couple more questions. So we've got, and by the way, both of you can stay for a few minutes after this, so if you have questions of our speakers, I'm sure you can grab them. There's more food coming, and the bar will be open.
Thank you. You talked about standardization and essentially the importance of locking in a nuclear technology, right? Saying costs will come down 30 to 50% maybe. What you're competing with is solar and batteries, which have come down 90%. And when you think about when you're talking about bringing this nuclear capacity online, you're not competing with today's solar cost, right? You're talking about solar and batteries 10 to 20 years from now. And so there is a very real scenario where that energy becomes significantly cheaper than today. And so that a decision to build nuclear looks folly or loses momentum in the future. So in that future as well, you'll say, well, we need baseload power, we need grid inertia. Well, the grid inertia point has fallen away recently when they show that batteries and inverters can actually play that role in stabilizing the grid. And demand with AI and the evolution of things, we don't know how it's going to look. And so how confident are you that 10, 20 years from now, the demand forecasts will come true and will be flat enough and need baseload power in a way that we'll look back and say it was the right decision to start down this path? Just to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, but you trust the experts at the Independent Electricity System Operator and those who manage our grids globally to plan for the power that we're going to need in the future. And again, it doesn't really matter in a way how the cheap energy is. There's still going to be, even with the battery storage and as it becomes more reliable and cheaper as well. I mean, I was the minister that brought in, I believe, the largest storage procurement in the province's history, and it surprised us how cheap we were able to get those batteries for through the ISO procurement process, which was a great story, right? Because we're going to need that. People used to talk about storage as being the holy grail in an energy system, and I think they still do to a certain extent because it helps make those renewables a little more reactive to when you need the power on the grid. But at the same time, the life of those assets is relatively short compared to a nuclear power plant, which can be a 100-year asset now. Yes, the upfront cost is expensive, but when you're amortizing it over a long period of time, the levelized cost of electricity becomes very, very affordable. I believe you. I believe the fact that technology is going to continue. I mean, listen, I bought a 57-inch TV in 1995 that is the size of probably the small car you drove in here today, but a few years later, you're buying wafer-thin 65-inch televisions for a fraction of the cost. So technology is going to continue to evolve. It's really hard to answer the question. We can only do the best that we can do with what we know now and the smart people that are working in these various departments.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point and a fair comment. I think, yeah, well, I have every reasonable expectation that wind and solar and batteries will continue to get cheaper. But I also think we've sort of reached a critical threshold where the cost of those technologies is no longer the constraint, right? The cost of generation is going down. The cost of transmission, distribution continues to go up. We're going to build where it's cheapest to build those technologies now. So maybe the decline in cost will offset the need to build further afield for future wind and solar projects. But you know, it's a bigger deal for solar to drop from $5 to $1 a watt, where it is now, than it is for solar to drop from $1 to 50 cents a watt.
Okay, one last question. Karen.
Hello.
My old friend and colleague, Karen Townhall.
You can always depend on having Pembina folks sitting in the crowd to ask questions. I can't let the opportunity go away without being the one in the crowd who asks about waste and the costs associated with dealing with waste, because you're talking about the costs of building nuclear, and also public acceptance of, are you willing to have nuclear power if that means having the waste in your backyard? I'm from British Columbia. We're the nuclear-free zone right now, but I know in Ontario you had a hard time finding a place in a community that would accept the waste, and so would love your comments on that. And also I understand that waste generated per unit of energy generated in a SMR is actually higher than a conventional reactor. So yeah, great. Would be great to hear your perspectives on that.
Yep, sure. A fair question. I think from the cost perspective, you know, the cost for dealing with the waste from a nuclear plant is included in the price per kilowatt hour here in Ontario and in New Brunswick as well. So the price that's being paid for electricity now is paying for the deep geological repository, which will eventually get built in Northern Ontario in Ignace. When that process started for siting the nuclear waste management operation facility, there were 22 different communities that put their hand up wanting to host that facility. As the consultations, you know, continued, some of them whittled away. But at the end of the day, there was a very fierce competition between the two finalists for that DGR for a number of different reasons. And right now, the waste is being stored at the sites of the facilities, so at Darlington or Pickering or Bruce Power, on site. And when you consider the amount of electricity that's generated from those three facilities, again, upwards of 60% of Ontario's electricity for the last 35 years or more in the case of Pickering, the amount of waste is stored on site in a building that's about the size of a grocery store in dry containers. So it's not really that much waste. And I think, you know, when I bring foreign delegations in to see where the waste is being stored in our Ontario plants, today, they're amazed. This is it. This is all the waste there is from, you know, 50 years of operation in the case of Pickering. There was one more piece that I wanted to touch on, and I think it has to do with, you know, the social acceptance piece. And you know, I'm seeing this in different places. It's obviously a question that comes up when I'm speaking about nuclear internationally. What are you going to do with the waste? And in some cases, and we'll talk about the Russians, for instance, Rosatom builds nuclear plants. They actually take the spent fuel away from countries where they build and take it back to Russia. So that's not something we would do. If we were building CANDUs abroad, we would be asking them to come up with you know, their own solution to dealing with the spent fuel. The other piece that's really interesting right now as this whole DGR discussion continues is there are technologies that are available now to reprocess the spent fuel from pressurized water reactors and reuse that fuel, you know, particularly in the CANDU fleet, but also in the EDF fleet in France, where they're using spent fuel from PWRs. So at the end of the day, will there be the need for this DGR? I know it's something that we talked about technology evolving. You know, this is something that may evolve faster than we think. There's obviously a price associated with taking that spent fuel, refabricating it, and then using it again. But you know, when a spent fuel rod goes through a PWR or a heavy water reactor like a CANDU, it's really only used about upwards of 10% of its capability at that time. So there's still a lot of energy left in that fuel rod that can be reused. So technology is going to continue to evolve, and it'll be really interesting to see if we do need to store this waste or spent fuel underground at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting that the French are trying to do a great job of extracting more of that energy out of plutonium and reusing it. I've got one last thought, but Brendan, I don't know if you want to say anything about the waste issue.
It's a hugely significant problem, needs to be addressed. I think the willing host model that has been advanced by the NWMO is the way to go. We've seen other jurisdictions adopt it. At the same time, all of the high-grade nuclear waste that has been produced since the dawn of the atomic age in the 1950s could fill a football field about 30, 40 feet high. If we get a 90 or 95% decarbonized grid and we double or triple the size of that, I would take that trade.
Yeah. Good line.
On the waste issue, it reminds me of a story I heard Bill McDonough tell. William McDonough is the great environmental architect. And he said in Hanover, Washington, where there's a lot of nuclear research and there's a meeting of nuclear physicists, and they were discovering, trying to talk about, well, what do you do in that pernicious problem? How do you mark sites where there's waste? It's kind of the semiology of big risk. It's it's like, well, you got to mark it in a way so that if we're not around, nuclear physicists aren't around, then aliens, if they land there, they'll know not to dig. And there are members of the Yakima First Nation that were listening to this conversation, and they said, you don't have to worry about that. We'll just tell the aliens not to dig there. And a very different sort of cultural sense of resilience and longevity. Anyway, listen, I want to really thank Todd. I want to thank Brendan. You've been terrific. You've been generous with your time. So everyone, please give them a big round of applause. And a big thanks to my team as well with Advanced Climate Solutions, Energy versus Climate, Emmett Tandon, our producer who's listening in. I've got Carlos Pena, I've got Sam Beatty. Carlos managed to rope in his partner, Selena, who's been helping, so thanks very much. Thanks to Mars, and a big thanks, I saw him at some point, Jeff Bird of the Conscon Foundation. Jeff, thank you. As I say, there's no can-do money in this project, but Jeff Bird of the Conscon Foundation put money in, and including in tonight, so we're very grateful. And thank you. This is a conversation not just about the right reactor for Canada, can we keep costs down? Partly this is a conversation of, can we build big things in this country? And I'd tell, folks on the left and the right, energy gridlock is good for no one. And if you can't build anything, whether it's an oil and gas project or you can't build, you can hijack those same regulatory processes. If you don't like oil and gas projects, you can hijack them and use them to block renewables projects that people like, and vice versa. So I think in this country, the one thing that Mark Carney is clear is we need to get back to building big things. And tonight is the first step in discussing that. And good thing we didn't solve all the problems, else we'd have to cancel the remaining 3 roundtables that we've got scheduled. So thanks, hang out, we've got food, we've got drink, we've got this room for a bit, and really appreciate you coming out tonight. Thanks, folks.